listeners. This program is brought to you by me, Rob Chase. So go to robchase.net, that's robchase.net, and learn how you can support this program and perhaps benefit your health and finances too. Homeschooling your child? Stop by the Homeschool Bookshop at 5612 North Wall in Spokane. Visit with Amber and search for the curriculum that will help your student learn the important things in their education. Computer problems? Call Julia at Inland System Works 499-8728 or go to inlandsystemworks.com. In the meantime, send me an email and let me know what you think of our interviews and suggest guests or topics you would like to hear in the future. You can reach me at my website, robchase.net. And now to our program. Today my guests are Tim Bend and Spencer Lowell. You know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and both of these gentlemen have stories of good intentions causing trouble instead of preventing trouble. So Spencer, tell us your story.
Well, thanks, Rob, for the time to speak today. It's really quite a pleasure. I wish the circumstances were a little different. However, we have some issues with some of our state departments that are basically wiping out some of our basic liberties. In my case, our family operated and owned an adult family home for 3.5 years. But I also chose to carry a concealed pistol, and I made sure to do everything by the book. Got my concealed carry permit license, have a clean criminal record, and none of that seemed to matter. Once they discovered my concealed carry permit on file with the state, the Department of Social and Health Services sent investigators into our home, escorted by law enforcement officers. And it didn't matter that we had all the necessary compliances with the regulations, such as a lockbox where you keep the pistol, when I'm not carrying, that sort of thing. None of that mattered. They came in, they shut down the retirement home after only one 33-minute meeting. That's all it took, one 33-minute meeting, and they were prepared to shut the whole thing down. And what does that mean? Well, unfortunately, that means all the employees would have lost their jobs, our family would have lost our investments, the 6 elderly residents that I cared for were going to be forcefully evicted from their homes. And that's the goal, the supposed good intentions of forming DSHS in the first place is to protect elderly residents from harm. But instead, this is an example where they were ready to evict those elderly residents from their home. And when they did not want to, they went around to all of them. 3 times they came to the retirement home and asked them, are you feeling threatened? Does Spencer threaten you in any way? Do you feel like you're in danger? And the families and the residents all said, no, we love the care here. But it didn't matter. They still, took that extra step to shut it down and destroy basically everything we'd worked so hard.
Was this in a form of a raid or something that this incident happened?
It was. Once they discovered the concealed carry permit on file, they came to the adult family home. They wouldn't even get out of their cars to speak with us. They waited until law enforcement arrived, and these are people that I've dealt with before. These are our licensors, and it never felt like they were threatened or in danger beforehand anytime I've worked with them. But it's this time they wouldn't even talk to us unless they had.
So did they just randomly do a search and knew you were there and came in and then called for police intervention?
Well, they raided the retirement home without notice, and that's when they would go around to the residents asking if they felt threatened, that sort of thing. And then the second meeting was when we actually arranged it, because I hadn't been there at the time. I was like, yeah, let's meet at the retirement home. Let's sit down and talk about everything. And so we talked about it. We thought it was a great meeting. They saw our lock boxes, and the DSHS was actually very pleasant to speak with. However, their actions were totally not congruent with how they approached it. So,
and what precipitated this intervention was they just happened to know that you got a concealed weapon permit, which of course is perfectly legal. I have one too. And they decided to investigate further, since if you were carrying a weapon, maybe you you might have been a threat somehow instead of protecting the people there.
And that's, I can kind of see how somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of experience with firearms might equate somebody who carries a firearm as a criminal. But that's not always the case. People carry firearms all over the county and all over the state.
Well, most of my friends have concealed weapon permits.
Sure.
And, they go everywhere they can, unless they're supposed to check them at the door or there's something posted that they can't carry one in there. So I just don't see what you did wrong. And yet now you have a criminal record now.
Well, that's just the thing. It wasn't enough that they had to shut the retirement home down. They had to also conferred with some of the other departments who they're very closely related with, like the Department of Early Learning, and they, without any involvement with me, no contact whatsoever, no interviews, no contacting people that I know or know me, they basically labeled me as too dangerous to be around the elderly and children. And this is on my criminal record. Whenever I try to go get a job and fill out the criminal background record, this comes up. So not only did they wipe out our family business and wipe out my career, they also have left me destitute because there's no way that I can get a job in this state with the same status as like a child molester would have. Right. It's really quite unbelievable.
So how long ago did this happen?
This all started back in August, and I finally got the criminal record in about December. Just by filling out a background check. They said, "Oh, we remember Spencer. Spencer has the gun. We're gonna go ahead and give."
So when was the last time you worked, where you earned money?
The last time I worked was I stayed on the payroll for a little while to help transition because I was basically responsible for running all the day-to-day operations of the business. It was about November when that was my last paycheck, and been unemployed ever since.
Is the business still there?
The business is still there. What they actually did was, because when I think they started reviewing it and realized what they had done was wrong, what they did instead was when they shut down the business, we filed for an appeal at administrative court. Well, the administrative court system is broken. There's a 7-month wait for a business to get an appointment. If you're an employee and say you want to get unemployment, they'll get you in a couple weeks.
So you did nothing wrong. Everything you did was legal. Mm-hmm. And you've got a criminal record now. Mm-hmm. And you've been several months without work, and you've appealed. That's 7 more months. So really, you have no livelihood.
No livelihood. Well, the thing about the 7 months,
you need to have a job to raise money to have a lawyer defend you.
Exactly. So if they leave you destitute, how are you supposed to defend yourself? I have a laundry list of laws in front of me that are all there to protect gun owners and your right to carry when you can follow all the rules in the proper channels. However, it's like none of those laws made a difference whatsoever. In my naivete, I called the Attorney General's office of Washington State, and I said, I'm having a lot of trouble here. I don't have any money to fight this, and my future is over in Washington State. And what they told me, the lady on the other end of the line said, "I don't think you understand, sir. We are the lawyers for the Department of Social and Health Services."
Oh, right.
And it's like, oh, thank you very much. And I hung up. And it's like, how intimidating is that to be able to be ruined by without any due process by a state agency, and knowing that they have the full resources of the Office of the Attorney General at their disposal. I mean,
well, it sounds like you have a good case. Have you been able to contact an attorney who would do something pro bono for you?
That's what I've been looking for. I'm looking for either, not necessarily pro bono, certainly, work on contingency and take a bit of the settlement, whatever that might be. And certainly it should be rather large because they wiped out a business. There's a lot of wages that have been lost, and they violated a lot of civil rights. However, what I run into most of the time is a lot of lawyers specialize, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, that's not our specialty." Most of the time it's, "Do you have 30 grand? No, I don't have 30 grand. And other times they're just completely terrified of taking on the state.
Well, Tim Bend is our other guest today, and Tim, your wife has a child care, and your issue is kind of background checks too, I think. What can you tell us about that?
Well, he knows as well that the Department of Early Learning is a problem because his mother runs a child care, and so he can't go to his mom's house or his dad's house because he was a law-abiding citizen with a gun permit, and we all know that that's legal, and most of your criminals don't have gun permits. They just carry them illegally. Well, I would think in his case, especially with the background check, they would invite that because he would be able to protect the people in his care. And with child care, it's a similar issue. They're illegally disqualifying people's backgrounds. A lady out in the Spokane Valley runs a child care facility, and one of her employees her background was disqualified because of a traffic violation more than 20 years ago. I've heard a lot of stories. I've been talking to child care providers from across the state over the last 6 months. And this is a major problem where people have been sent away from their own businesses and had their background checks disqualified. And essentially, some of them have just lost their homes, they lose their cars, they have no source of income, and can find no legal help because they have no money. They don't have the legal retainers, and like he stated, that there's a lot of attorneys that don't want to take on this kind of case. So what I've been working on is communicating with some law firms that specialize in class action lawsuits, where he could be involved with a suit, that would essentially involve hundreds of individuals, because they're looking into files that are sealed files and disqualifying people on bases that are not criminal violations, and then they make a criminal conviction against you with no due process. Essentially, you're, like he said, destitute without a hearing. They make an administrative decision that criminalizes you when you've not broken the law. And some of the convictions they're doing, they're also using these ALJ hearings to convict you, and those are a civil court or an administrative court. Hearing? An ALJ hearing is an administrative law judge hearing, and that is where you have disputes between individuals, state agencies, and they get adjudicated by this higher judge from the state. And the office that does that is the Office of Administrative Hearings. It's another state department.
Well, you can be a good person, and you can follow all the rules. And of course, in this day and age, with the economy, probably a lot of people are looking maybe at starting adult family homes. We have a graying of the population, or child cares, as a lot of people, parents have sometimes, more than one job. They have to have that child care and shift work and everything if they are lucky to get a job. So there might be people looking at doing that too. But this is a hazard. Why go into this, fill this need, if you're likely to get a criminal record or get slammed for trying to do something that would be good for the economy?
Well, and like he was saying, now you're on the list. Even if they close your business, actually, I don't know if that's the way it is with adult family care, but or home care facilities, health care facilities, but with child care facilities, if they close you down because you don't have an adequate fence or something of that nature, they still disqualify your background even though you've done nothing criminal. So then you can't even volunteer at a school or a church and work with children there. And so they just destroy you. So essentially, you're probably safer being an actual felon than you are a health care or child care provider in the state of Washington, because then you have to be tried in a real court, and the state will afford you an attorney, as the law requires for criminal cases. And in this situation, they just make an administrative decision in their own little office and say, well, we don't like this guy, we're going to disqualify him, and they just destroy people without due process. It's unreal.
Okay, Spencer, is it possible for someone, say you have a dispute with your neighbor, they don't like where your fence is at, that they can retaliate by calling one of these agencies? Hey, you got to investigate this guy. I think he's dangerous. I've seen him. I know he's carrying a weapon. Is that a possibility where, it's someone totally innocent, just on hearsay, can be in trouble?
Well, absolutely. It actually has happened a few times to my mother, who's a child care provider. We have a lot in common because I take care of the elderly and she takes care of children. But she's had, that's one of the things that started it all, was that she had a disgruntled, it was either an ex-friend or an ex-customer, but they called in a complaint to the Department of Early Learning that was totally bogus, that she had a major marijuana growing operation. And so this was used as a way to get revenge on her, and that's when, her house was raided by law enforcement and child protective services and everything. That's how a lot of this got started, was that I was called by my mom. She was really upset and obviously distressed, and I came over, and I started recording with my cell phone, just following licensors around, because they do try to pull tricky things that aren't in Washington state law and try to shut you down. So as I was following these people around, recording what they were doing and being an observant witness, that's when, you know, the CPS guy, you know, managed to get me outside where law enforcement was waiting. Even though they didn't have a warrant, law enforcement was still there. And they basically forced me to give them my ID at our home without a warrant. And I questioned them about that. I said, are you sure? You don't have a warrant. Can you do this? Can you take me to jail for not giving you my ID? And they said, yes, I can. We can take you to jail for not giving us your ID. And I'm like, okay, here's my ID. Of course, they discovered the concealed carry permit, told Child Protective Services, and then from there the story goes. But it's that example.
And of course, they didn't find anything like that in your mom's home at all. It was all...
Oh, yeah, it was all bogus. I mean, and they figured it out a few hours later that it was all bogus, but I mean, still, it's
well, the problem is if you have a business like that and someone's thinking about placing a family member there or a child at a daycare, and they say, oh, well, I heard that was raided for a marijuana growing operation. It doesn't matter, you're found totally innocent. It still gives you a stigma.
Exactly, you're stigmatized because you have all these police cars swarming around your business, and I mean, people stop by and they say, what's going on here? You know, there's a major marijuana bust going on, and it's like, it doesn't matter.
And someone's thinking about placing a family member there or a child at a daycare, and they say, oh, well, I heard that was raided for a marijuana growing operation. It doesn't matter, you're found totally innocent. It still gives you a stigma.
Exactly, you're stigmatized because you have all these police cars swarming around your business, and I mean, people stop by and they say, what's going on here? You know, there's a major marijuana bust going on, and it's like, it doesn't matter if that's all bogus, because I mean, you just had the entire community see all of this.
Well, there should be some way to rectify that, and I understand that the police have to investigate. If there's a report, they need to look into things. They also need to do it legally, and then these state agencies that the police are accompanying in these searches, like the child care provider that was raided in December. The police raided her facility, and she's still not been convicted or even charged. She hasn't even been charged with a crime, and she's going to lose everything she has that was done by DSHS in a police raid. And there's no accountability in these state agencies. We want children and vulnerable adults cared for and safe. But really what we have going on now is that the people that are keeping them safe are not safe. Because the state agency, essentially, with absolutely no laws over them, because they're not being accountable to the public or to our legislature even, can destroy these providers that are creating this service to keep them safe. So they're kind of defeating the purpose of being a state agency to keep our public safe.
What about remedies? How do you see, I mean, it's a fairly complex situation. You can see if you put yourself in the police shoes, there's a complaint you have to follow up. I mean, there could be substance there. And then again, you also have like a Salem witchcraft trials. On the other hand, where someone totally innocent is now, they're being blemished by this whole thing. So how do you remedy that?
Well, the remedies so far is U.S. District Court. And the only problem with that is one of the last lawsuits that was filed against the Department of Early Learning that I know of, anyways, in Washington State, because this is the first state to have a dictatorship of early learning. And they won the suit in U.S. District Court, and U.S. District Court told them they needed to adopt a few rules of how they raid these facilities and the operations that they do. And that was 4 years ago, and they still didn't adopt those rules. They're not on file, but if you go in the U.S. District Court papers, the numbers are even there. So right now, the remedy is move to another state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. What about you, Spencer? What would be the remedy to your situation?
The remedy to my situation is basically to go to civil court.
Yeah.
I mean, I know if I had a jury in front of me and I was able to plead my case, I don't even need a lawyer. I got all the laws in front of me right here. Yeah. But how are you supposed to get to that point? You can't go to civil court unless you have an attorney, and you can't have an attorney unless you got money. And I've got nothing left. They took everything from me.
Well, you can present a case yourself. There's actually ways that you can be your own attorney in a court case. The only problem with that is that you're not going to be able to follow all the procedures properly, more than likely. And you've got the Attorney General's office that's going to have possibly a whole panel of attorneys there to discredit you and pick you apart, and so it's going to be very difficult for you to do something like that on your own.
Well, that's who I'm going up against, would be the resources of the Office of the Attorney General, because those are the lawyers of the Department of Social and Health Services and DEL. So
Right. So you have
don't you think, wouldn't a judge be able to see that? Here's a guy who can't afford a lawyer because he's got this hanging over him. He has no recourse unless he moves out of the state, starts over again. Wouldn't a judge be able to see that if he's got all the laws copied down, a judge and a jury? Because I've heard of people defending them. I mean, they would prefer to defend themselves and turn it over to an attorney, because there's also good and bad attorneys too.
Well, I've been in a hearing with the Attorney General's office representing the state, the Department of Early Learning, and it was against a child care provider, and they represented themselves. And the state official for the Department of Early Learning told the judge that her job working for the state was to enforce Washington Administrative Code. But they do other things too, and that's exactly what she said. So she basically just admitted to the judge that she worked outside of law, and that's normal for them. So I think you'd have to find a judge outside of the state jurisdiction, because essentially what like he would be fighting, or any other child care provider trying to clear their name, or healthcare worker, or foster care. They're doing the same thing to foster care as well. I've heard stories there. Is, you know, U.S. District Court, but you're going against basically taxpayers. The taxpayers are funding this case. So they could drag it out until he's absolutely destitute and starving. You know, he may win the case ultimately if he can survive long enough and have clean clothes to go to court.
Yeah, what's the difference between Revised Code of Washington and Washington Administrative Code?
I can answer that question because I've been doing a lot of research on this. Basically, in Washington State, you have two legal systems and two sets of laws. You have the RCWs, which are the laws created by the Washington State Legislature, our elected representatives. However, there's a second set of laws called Washington Administrative Code. These are our regulations put out by Child Protective Services, DSHS, DEL, any of those state bureaucracies. These have the same, they're basically laws that they create. They're not written by elected representatives. They're written by the regulators, and that's why you have like regulations against firearms in your place of business, because they try to regulate that, even though it's completely contradictory to the RCWs, the laws that are created by our elected representatives.
But RCWs do supersede Washington Administrative Code. The only problem you run into when you have a conflict of RCW and Washington Administrative Code, which I told you the one instance with U.S. District Court. U.S. District Court made the decision that they needed to adopt these Washington Administrative Codes because they did have conflicting aspects from RCW, and the department just didn't do it.
But Spencer, you said you would need to go to district court as opposed to going in front of an administrative board.
I need to go to civil court because they actually provided me no opportunity to have an administrative appeal. And they're supposed to, but they didn't. Just like the only Washington State Administrative Code regarding firearms in adult family homes says keep all firearms locked and accessible only to authorized persons. That's it. That's all there is.
Do you think you could get any help from Gun Owners of America or National Rifle Association?
I've contacted both organizations. NRA is willing to allow us to apply to get compensation after the fact, not pay for the attorney. Yeah. So, I mean, you're back to square one. Basically, you can't get justice unless you can access the justice system.
What about the ACLJ? I think this station actually has ACLJ, which is Jay Sekulow, looking out for people's rights. Have you contacted them yet, or?
I haven't heard of an ACLJ.
ACLJ. Okay, but you also talked about what's the place downtown? Center for Justice. Are they helping you at all, or?
They're currently looking over my case. Center for Justice is, and I hope that there's something that they can do. I gave them pretty much everything they would need to look at this case pretty carefully. But it's just I've applied to a lot of free legal services and things like that of that nature, and here it is, almost 6 months later, I still haven't had any
luck. Well, it's easy to get into trouble, but the wheels of justice grind so slowly when you're trying to get back out of trouble, I guess.